Why don't we get started? As folks join in, they can jump in. I want to welcome you all this afternoon to our webinar. My name is Kevin Mahoney. I'm with Raymond James Corporate Advisors Group and the Mahoney Group. I also am part of the team for SHRM 401k Solutions. And we're lucky today. We have my friend and colleague Phil Merdinger from October 3, along with one of his senior consultants, Lisa Lowe. And today we're going to talk about the retirement plan landscape. We'll spend a few minutes on what's going on, what's changing, what's new and interesting. We'll talk about the pillars of retirement and the challenges around current plan design. There's a lot available today, a lot different than what there was, say, 20, 30 years ago. Phil and Lisa will get into some of the plan design issues and some of the usages for cash balance plans. And then we'll go to Q&A. But I wanted to start by saying that we don't really want this to be just cash balance. It's about cash balance because we think it's a really interesting, really important topic, and a plan design that may not be as familiar as 401k or traditional pension plans. But we really think in today's environment, it's a great tool for both small market and larger companies to use and to rethink of the way we retire, to complement the 401k system and the coming state mandate plans. And we don't think of 401k or cash balance or non-qualified deferred comp or financial wellness or any of those things in a vacuum. And we think of a retirement benefits program, or even more broadly, a financial benefits program, which could include things like financial planning or health savings accounts. And each one of these things runs one into the next. So for employers, the key to deciding to using these things is deciding what the purpose of your financial benefit programs are or should be. And really, the big things we think of, first and foremost, our most basic responsibility is to help your employees retire with dignity. But it's also to retain and attract talent. And how do we use various benefit programs to help retain and attract talent? How do we reduce taxes for owners and key employees who are looking for ways to reduce taxes? And then it's really about building the right programs around that and understanding what the regulatory considerations are. What are we paying and what are we paying for? How does it work? With new legislation and the ongoing challenges of finding and keeping talent, this is an ideal time to revisit plan design and think of it in the context of total benefit packages. Because, we are now in a place I don't think many employers have been in the last 50 or 75 years. We have as many as 5 generations in the workplace. It's a very, very tough time for the HR community to communicate across, 22-year-old kids to 70-year-olds all in the workplace, all with different views of the world, all with different views of how the benefits should work, and really even different views of careers. When I came into the world, your goal was to find a career, find a company that you loved and stick with it forever, and that's no longer the case. We're also dealing with the personalization of benefits. So financial wellness and financial planning, creating personalized paths for people and helping them figure out where the next best dollar should be spent, whether it's 401k, HSA, non-qualified deferred comp, paying down debt. There's a whole continuum of things that your employees are really concerned with. And how do we reevaluate the traditional retirement plan system in that context? How do we drive the maximum and optimum tax benefit programs for the high wage earners? How do we drive productivity for maybe the rank and file? And how do we think about the cost of delayed retirement? In what is now really a true retirement crisis, where the average American is not saving enough for retirement. What does that mean for healthcare costs in keeping those people beyond when they really want to be there, beyond their productivity years? So how do we take all of this and design a financial benefit package that meets the needs of 4 or 5 different generations of people, meets the needs of the organization, most importantly? How do we how do we make your life easier? How do we make the lives of your finance and HR staffs better? And how do we do that without breaking the bank? Kristen? Cash balance plans. Today's primary topic is cash balance plans. And when I was a rookie in this business, you never heard the term cash balance plans. There was pension plans, there was 401k, and there was non-qualified deferred comp. And while cash balance plans existed, they weren't a big use. They're growing today at 2 times the rate of 401k plans. They are now about 50% of all defined benefit plans and growing. We're expecting a 15-fold increase over time. And pension plans used to be just for the large market. The big publicly traded companies were where you saw pension plans. Well, the fastest growing segment for cash balance plan may be the small market. There is, and there's been headlines around, IBM adopting a cash balance plan and using that in conjunction with the 401k. So at IBM, you no longer get a 401k match. You get a cash balance contribution and you put your money into your 401k. So for large organizations, cash balance plans can be a very, very effective way of using various types of plans to meet needs. But probably a more interesting area for the cash balance plan is in the mid and small companies. The LLCs, LLPs, S corps. It's an ideal program that enables the owners and key employees to save significantly more than they could in a 401k, and while giving a very, very healthy benefit that's portable to the rank and file employees. So it's a great program to have available for your employees. There's another kind of smaller use for this that we see, but it's a really interesting use, and Phil may touch on this later. It's a tax efficient way for partners to buy each other out over time. Where you have a senior partner and some junior partners in terms of age. The contributions to these types of plans are going to have a pretty big differential, but that can be used to offset purchase price at the end of a partnership. So that's a pretty interesting way to approach it. And the other thing that in my mind makes new cash balance plans really attractive is we can minimize the risk of becoming underfunded by using market-based crediting rates. So there's a lot of really interesting ways and creative ways to use a cash balance plan in conjunction with 401k and non-qualified plans to meet the needs across a diverse population, benefiting the employees really strongly, while benefiting ownership and senior employees very well. In these days, 80% of people believe we're in a retirement crisis. People have little faith that Social Security is going to be there. I think that's probably a little bit overblown. I think Social Security is going to have to be reformed, but the rumors of its demise, I think, are greatly exaggerated. But we do have a crisis, and you're seeing it through legislation, through the Secure Act, through states coming out with mandates. There is a problem where half the population is not saving for retirement or not saving sufficiently for retirement. 48% of workers, 55 and older, have no retirement savings whatsoever. So if you really believe Social Security is in crisis and half of workers over 55 don't have any retirement savings, that would point to a major problem. I think the legislators, both at state and federal level, are taking steps to address that. I think it's probably a little bit exaggerated through some special interests that have a vested interest in seeing a crisis. Never let a crisis go to waste, but there are concrete steps you can take to help you and your employees mitigate some of these issues. Inflation being a major, major issue. Even the old pension plans, if you had a fixed pension plan without a COLA, inflation is, while we look at inflation today as crippling, back in the 70s, we had much, much higher inflation rates. And people still managed to get through that and survive it nicely. But it is a real concern. And despite CPI coming down, the cost of living hasn't come down, just the rate of growth has slowed down. So inflation is something that needs to be managed. Cash balance plays into that very nicely. And this is a big issue that cash balance can address, but also we are seeing, and we'll address further on in here, the pensionization or the ability to build in lifetime income. So each one of these things plays into a pretty strong factor for why thinking about your plan design, whether it's within just the 401k space or expanding beyond 401k to cash balance and NQ plans. It's really a great time, probably not a better time in my career, that all of these really new and interesting legislative initiatives are coming together to drive great outcomes. But you have to think about what's ideal for you, your participants, your employees, and your organization. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to my friend Phil, and we'll get into the meat and potatoes of this.
Thanks, Kevin. Appreciate it. And thanks, everyone, for joining us today. Let's spend a little bit of time talking about what we believe are the 4 pillars of success for any sound retirement program. And you'll note that I use the word program, not plan. As Kevin mentioned a little earlier, I don't think that there's a one-size-fits-all to any problem, and it's a combination of different programs that puts you in a position to be successful and also puts your employees in a position to be successful as well. It's all about improving outcomes. What can you do through a retirement program that gives people better outcomes? And when I'm talking about better outcomes from the employee standpoint, it's the ability to have some foundational lifetime income. That's really important. It's also important on the employer side to have financial outcomes that make sense. Things that are predictable, things that are not volatile, things that can be budgeted for, things that don't have any surprise. Being able to create a program that employees understand and appreciate it. At the end of the day, if you've got something and people don't value it, you're really not getting a return on the investment that you're making into the program. Ideally, you want your retirement programs and all of your rewards programs, for that matter, to align with what you're trying to do from a workforce planning standpoint. Moving people in, up, through, and out of the organization. That's really important to have those kind of levers and to do it in a way where you're balancing the risks and the benefits and getting to the sweet spot, so to speak. Let's move ahead to the next slide if we can. If you take a look at the way retirement plans have been approached in the past, I'm going to start at the 2 ends of the continuum, then work our way into it. If you take a look at the old defined benefit plans that Kevin was mentioning years ago, those aren't around as much anymore. And the reason they're not is the risk and the volatility that employers were experiencing just got to an unmanageable point. You add into that the fact that people didn't understand what they have, they didn't value what they have, and that's why you saw the stake being driven into the heart of a lot of the old conventional defined benefit plans. At the same time, if you look at the other end of the continuum with 401k plans in particular, I mean, it's interesting that for those who might remember when 401k was first enacted many years ago, it was created as a supplemental retirement program, not as a pension plan.
And it was a mistake.
Yes, that's absolutely right. And as a result, you've seen for decades people trying to find ways to turn the program into something it wasn't originally intended to do. It still has a very valuable role, but it wasn't intended to be a retirement plan. There's challenges that went along with it, not the least of which is if employees aren't saving, they aren't getting any money. That's well and good if people can afford to save, but when you're in a position where you've got to pay your bills and you don't have the disposable income left, that starts putting stress on the system. And there's really no levers that you can pull in a defined contribution plan from a workforce management standpoint. If somebody wants to, they take their marbles and leave and go somewhere else. As a result, what you've seen happening is more of a migration to the middle with it. How can you do something that captures what the good things are of defined benefit and defined contribution plans and get rid of the noise and the bad things that people were trying to run away from? And that kind of leads us to cash balance plans with it. And just to get all of us on the same nomenclature with things, when we're talking about a cash balance plan, it is an account-based plan that looks like, walks like, and quacks like a defined contribution plan, but it's technically considered a defined benefit plan. It's a plan where the company makes a contribution, some percentage of pay, we call it a pay credit. Those accounts grow with earnings over time, and then when you get to retirement, the money comes out. So that's what we're thinking of when we're talking about cash balance plans. There's several really attractive advantages for a cash balance plan, any qualified plan for that matter. Contributions are deductible, growth is tax deferred. The amount of money that you can set aside into these programs can be very significant. Lisa's going to talk about that a little later. Unlike other types of non-qualified plans, cash balance plans protected against creditors. The money can only be used for the exclusive benefit of the participant, but you still have the flexibility and the portability. Where you get the flexibility, and we'll talk about that a little later, is the ability for people to be able to personalize their pensions, which is really, really important these days. Let's go ahead and move to the next slide if we could, please. So there are some risks you want to be cognizant of when you're looking at any kind of retirement program. A cash balance plan does have mandatory contributions like any other defined benefit plan does. So you do put yourself in a position of having to fund the plan on a consistent basis, and you need to be committed to provide the plan for some period of time with it. You could argue that the investment risk borne by the employer is a risk to the company, but that's a risk that can be managed effectively on the investment side. And it also raises the opportunity to add some additional level of input for how employees are structuring their retirement portfolio. Instead of the employee having to make all the choices, the employer is helping out too, which provides, we think, a better foundation for people going forward. Let's go ahead to the next one. When we think of cash balance plans, we tend to view it as a continuum, and it can range anywhere from a program, which is what I'll call a deferral-based cash balance plan, which allows partners, shareholders, executives to defer significant amounts of money on a pre-tax basis. As you'll see when Lisa talks, the amount of deferrals are multiples of what you would see in a conventional defined contribution plan. It can go all the way over to the other end of the continuum for something that's exclusively employer funded, something you might find in larger corporations, but in smaller businesses as well. And you can meet in the middle and have a combination of the two, which is really where you see a lot of the designs going these days with it.
And with that, introducing the cash balance program. So this really is the hybrid of best of both worlds between their old defined benefit plans and a 401k. The cash balance program is considered a qualified plan, as Phil was saying, just like your 401k. So it will follow similar rules and regulations, but it all has many of the best characteristics of a defined benefit plan, like potentially enormous contributions that are annual contributions and helping with large tax liabilities. So let's see how this really works. If you're familiar with your 401k profit sharing plan, these plans work much like a profit sharing plan on steroids. So in these programs, the risk between the owner and staff is fairly allocated, and the employer costs are stable and predictable. So this is, budgetable for a small business. Contributions to owners can be up to 4 times more than in a 401k plan alone. And they're based on a formula which considers age and wages. Benefits are in cash, which is, cash is king, accumulate based on the underlying investments in the plan. And in this plan, they are typically more conservative and professionally managed. So participants will see a yearly balance in cash on a statement, very transparent. At retirement, you have, like a 401k, you have options for rolling the money out into an IRA or 401k, or set up lifetime income options, like Phil was talking about a minute ago. It really is customizable, and we'll talk about that in a few moments as well. Now, I know many of you are asking yourselves, why have you never heard of this before? It must be a completely new type of program. But candidly, these have been gaining popularity and evolving in efficiency over really the last 20 years as an adjunct to the 401k plans, which are normally considered the foundation of your entire retirement program. Adding cash balance to the foundation is like adding a roof to your house, right? Protecting your nest egg and sheltering your business from tax liabilities. So look at a cash balance plan like the roof over your nest egg. I also wanted to quickly mention, we're especially excited about that market return cash balance design, which is mentioned here, with the account growth attached to the actual return from the internal plan investments. Without getting into too much detail, this is the model that mitigates risk in the plan that plan sponsors, when coupled with the 401k plan, really enhances the entire program. Did you want to jump in, Kevin? Sorry.
Yeah, I just had a question. Phil and you had both mentioned, or you both had mentioned that it could be significantly higher contributions. Could you just give folks an example of like how large it could be for the owners or key people?
Of course we will later. That's called a tease, Kevin. It's really working for you.
We'll definitely get to that.
We'll get there shortly.
One other quick comment with it. If everything evolves over time, if you take a look at how cash balance plans have evolved over time, the 1.0 version of cash balance plans would typically give people interest credits that were based on some fairly low fixed rate or tied to some T-bill rate, which, as we've seen over the past many years, has not been a very significant return. The challenge with those approaches was it created additional risk and volatility. What happens if you don't earn what the rate is that you're crediting? The market return approach that we're talking about here takes that off of the table. Whatever the portfolio does, that's what gets passed back on to the participant, and it really strips out the volatility and the fluctuation in contributions. So if you're thinking you're going to be able to contribute, pick a number, $500,000 a year, that's what you should expect to see within a pretty tight range going forward. So it's designed to get away from some of the challenges that people have seen over the years. Okay, we can move to the next one now.
Well, let the actuary talk about the graphics. So one of those enhancements that we see when the plans are together, working hand in glove, along with the obvious increase in the ability to save for retirement and assist in tax liabilities, and yes, with those massive contributions, which we'll get to shortly, really has the impact on attracting and retaining the best team members. A small to mid-sized business is a typical working person will never have the opportunity to be, in a pension. So it's a big deal, and we can consider this a form of pension. Especially, this day and age, everybody's leaving the workforce for the gig economy. Good team members are hard to find and even harder to keep. So using this as a tool for investments in human capital is very, very smart. Not only will you win in the morale department, which is also challenging these days, as they'll definitely appreciate the company that has their retirement as a priority, but then the organization will also get a tax deduction for the dollars that you've just invested in them. So that's a huge win-win for every type of organization. Now, I know I mentioned these programs. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, let's scoot back for a second, because one thing which I think is really important, we're talking about the ability to personalize your pension, which we think is really important. So let's imagine a world where, as I'm working, I'm building up 2 accounts, one of which is funded with my contributions in the 401k plan. There may be a match from the company. The other is the cash balance plan, but I have these two buckets of money that are growing over time. I get to retirement and I say, okay, how much of a pension salary do I want to pay myself? I know what I can get in terms of lifetime income out of the cash balance plan. Let's say that's $10,000 a year, just to pull a number out of the air. If I think I need more money than that, I can take money that I have in the 401k plan, roll it over into the cash balance plan, and use that as a way to purchase more lifetime income at affordable wholesale prices. If I don't think I need that much money, I can take some of the money out of the cash balance plan, roll it over into an IRA, roll it into the 401k plan potentially, but keep the money invested. And if I want to take some cash out and go buy a boat because I don't have a friend who's got a boat that I can use, I can do that too. And if I want to change my mind down the road, I can do that as well. This is really powerful, and it adds an element of flexibility for participants that they don't have, and it gives them the opportunity to get things at lower prices than they might be able to find if they were trying to do it in other areas. So much for the actuary and the graphics. Let's go to the next one.
As I mentioned before, Cash Balance Plan Marketplace has been growing substantially for the past 20 years and evolving into some of the advanced programs we know today, like the market return cash balance design. Despite the fact that most of the traditional defined benefit plans were larger companies, like Kevin alluded to, for the past several years, the small business owners are the fastest growing group adopting these plans. So much so that they're really commonplace now in the industry, and really an opportunity to have taxed advantage wealth accumulation. So to recap, we have talked about savings opportunities, tax deferred dollars for the organization, and this being a great tool to attract and retain good team members. But let's talk about how these plans work together, and how much are we really talking? Go ahead to the next slide.
Now, just before you go on to that, that's not to say that these plans aren't good for larger organizations either. Because, larger organizations can, if you're using a safe harbor formula, you may be able to build a guaranteed income through cash balance on one side, instead of making a safe harbor contribution or a non-elective to the 401k, you make it to a cash balance. So even for large organizations, it can actually serve a pretty interesting purpose in today's environment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is actually a really great example of how a 401k plan and a cash balance plan work together in terms of how much the contributions could potentially be. So let's say our business has been maximizing their 401k for years. The owners are happy with what they have, but they haven't been able to put away too much, but they really have an appetite for a little more tax assistance. So, and remember, I mentioned contributions in these cash balance programs are based largely on age and wages. So if you go down to toward the bottom and look at that 60-year-old business owner, usually we're talking about the business owners when we're looking at these scenarios, but we're showing the maximum 401k deferral of $34,750. That's with that little extra catch up he must be getting there. Profit sharing, if he wants, is another maximum $46,500, which is some pretty good dollars. But when you see the cash balance now, you see cash balance all by itself, $324,000. Yes, just for the one owner who is 60 years old. On top of those 401k limits, you can see the total limits are really enormous. And I just want to reiterate also that these are annual contributions. So this is the kind of dollars that you can see tax deferred from the organization on an annual basis.
Now it's up to that too, right? It's not,
Right.
you're not going to be locked into required contributions that high. It's up to that amount.
Correct. And what we're looking at really is what we call our age-based maximum for, an individual that age. 95% of our business owners, they've been investing in their business for the first decade of the company. So they want to throw as much as they can into this cash balance plan to kind of catch up and for the tax purposes. So generally we are working with the maximums, but certainly, an extra 100,000 is never bad either. So, but this is a perfect example of how the power of adding that cash balance plan to the 401k to enhances that into a beautiful retirement program. So.
And back to Kevin's point too, from a little earlier, you can see with the amount of money that accumulates in these plans, how this can be a really effective tool for succession planning within professional services firms and generating buckets of money that can be used to help fund the buyout of other partners when they retire.
And could you talk just for a minute about, if you're running a 401k with Safe Harbor, do you have to include everybody in the cash balance plan? Or can you discriminate a little bit, and can you get creative in who you cover and which plan?
Yes, the technical term for that is actuarial gymnastics. You do have flexibility. You don't necessarily need to be covering everybody. There are rules within the Internal Revenue Code where you have to have something which meets certain non-discrimination rules, but there's flexibility in that to be able to curate the participation in the definition of eligibility.
So Lisa, you want to put that in non-actuarial terms?
Thank you.
So generally, when we set these plans up in terms of coverage, everyone doesn't have to participate. We have something called the 40-50 rule, in which you only have to have 40% of the eligible folks actually in the cash balance plan. So that's great. And to your point, even with larger organizations that have 200 or 300 people, 50 is the number that we would have to cover. So it's very doable for both. Now,
and this is not to say you're gonna, you're trying to hurt someone else. What it really lets you do, it lets you reward your longest term, highest comped participants better, while still giving something that, for a 22-year-old or 23-year-old, it's still going to give them the opportunity to save a lot of money for retirement, but it's just allowing you to tilt the field a little bit more in favor of key employees, owners, partners, that sort of thing.
Correct. Right. Correct. And definitely, working alongside of the 401k plan, if there are employees, we utilize that safe harbor contribution to help with the non-discrimination testing. Everyone has to get a meaningful benefit according to the IRS. So some folks will get it in the cash balance plan, and then other folks will get, an extra amount of money in profit sharing. So literally everyone in the company does benefit from this type of plan at some level. That's pretty cool stuff. Where are we at time? 2:35. All right, quick small business owner situation. We actually kind of just talked through this, which I think is pretty common for everyone. Small business investing back into their business for the last 10 years, maxing out their 401k plan annually, which is great. And I know that a lot of companies are doing that. And then to make matters worse, the local competitors are poaching their staff. So they're losing people and they're looking for a solution. So the goals here are obviously more tax deferred dollars for the business owners to go into a plan. And this cash balance plan, which would enhance the 401k benefits, and turn it into a recruiting tool and a retention tool for the organization. So that is a perfect scenario for setting up a market rate cash balance plan, where the owners would get, at least 75, sometimes we even see up to like 98% of the money contributed into the plan. So it's a pretty significant, awesome tool.
Yeah, and again, I'm not advocating for, beating your employees out of something, but I know in our practice, we have business owners who poured their life into their business. They've gone without, they've taken care of their employees. They've taken very little compensation over the years. And when they finally get to a point where the business is stable and growing and and everything is good, now they can afford to save, but they're capped in the 401k. So they really can't. The only place they can do it is in a non-tax advantage. And this gives them an opportunity to catch up for those early years when, they were eating ramen and borrowing a car to get around so they get the business up and off the ground.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. I mean, this is the kind of the next step in progression in, helping save more and, the tax shelters as well. So yeah, good stuff. And this goes through the whole continuum. We've got a couple more larger company case studies. You can go ahead into the next slide, unless anybody has any questions about that.
I think we're good. So
yeah, and if you have questions, you can type it in. We'll grab it or we'll open it up at the end for questions.
If you think back to what we looked at a little earlier with the continuum of cash balance plans, the example Lisa just shared would be something over on the left side, which is something that was primarily, thank you, a deferral-based program where people are taking a salary deferral in exchange for a contribution into the cash balance plan. Let's move a little further over to the right on the continuum and look at a couple of other examples. So if we could scroll back down there, we're calling this the internal plan. This happens to be what we put in place for our business. You kind of need to eat your own cooking is the way we look at it. And we believe this is valuable for everyone. What we did was we put in a market return cash balance plan with the intention of being able to attract people, keep people, reward longevity, and provide a financial foundation. The plan is set up where the longer you work, the larger the contribution is that you're getting. And this goes in a partnership with our 401k. We felt that in our business, there's more value to deliver to the employees by spending the company money in the cash balance plan as opposed to spending it in the match on the 401k plan. Another thing that we did, which is another one of the hooks, so to speak, that you can have in the plan, is what we call a retiree healthcare account. That sets aside money that people can use when they retire to cover eligible healthcare costs. Think of it as something similar to what you might see with the different healthcare spending accounts, but this can be a whole lot larger and it can be done in conjunction with it. And we found that
you could have an HSA and build a component into the cash balance.
Yeah, and the neat thing about the cash balance side of it is it's kind of triple tax preferred. The contributions are deductible. The growth in the accounts is tax deferred, and the benefits are tax free. You do not pay taxes on the money that you take out as long as it's one of the eligible expenses, which is pretty much most everything you could think of along the way. So we find that a really effective component for people who are trying to solve the puzzle of what do we do to help our people afford healthcare coverage when they retire, which for some of you who may have seen it yourselves or with family members, it is not cheap if you retire before you're eligible for Medicare, and it isn't necessarily cheap when you are eligible for Medicare either with it. Let's look at another example as we keep going down the continuum, and we're going to be all the way at the right side here. This is a large financial institution that has a generous 401k plan, a very generous match, and they decided years ago to freeze their defined benefit plan, which, by the way, was a cash balance plan when they froze it. We found that the defined benefit plan was in a very, very significant overfunded position. There's far more money in the plan than needed to cover the liabilities. And similar to what Kevin was mentioning a little earlier, by taking what was the match in the 401k plan and contributing the same amount into the cash balance. So if I'm saying, Lisa, we were giving you $1 on the dollar match on the first 5% of your contributions in the 401k plan. Now we're going to give you a 5% contribution into the cash balance plan. Actually, what we did here is we kept a little bit back in the 401k plan to continue to encourage people to defer, but most of it got moved over. And by doing that, we were able to take the surplus that was in the plan and use it to fund what was the cash outlay for the match for the 401k plan. Huge cash flow savings for the business. The other thing which is really good about that too, though, is we've been talking about providing people with a financial foundation, lifetime income. What this does is it helps assure that that happens. Now we have everybody who's going to have a financial foundation with lifetime income, which we think is really important from what we've been talking about over the past several minutes.
And Phil, you know, this kind of brings up an interesting point. I don't know if there's anyone on the call today that has a defined benefit plan, but for the private sector, defined benefit plans having a surplus is kind of a you know, we're starting to see it now. For the last, 15, 20 years, defined benefit plans in the private sector were all underwater because the interest rate environment was so tough. Now we're starting to see plans reach 100%, frozen plans, reach 100% in assets to liabilities, and even getting into a surplus position. And we've worked very closely with October 3 over the years on helping companies terminate pension plans, on helping companies run a glide path to get fully funded. But now we're kind of getting into an interesting situation where we're starting to see some of our clients actually have a surplus. And one of the ways, if you have a surplus, you can't take that money back. You can either pay a giant excise tax on it or use it to fund something like a cash balance plan or an additional contribution to 401k for the people who had a benefit the pension. But it's just kind of this convergence of all these different factors: interest rates rising, equity markets being strong, pensions in a healthier position in those old frozen plans, and interesting new plan designs that all tie together.
Those are great points. And I'd be remiss if I didn't just mention again that one of the things you're seeing happen, IBM was an example, the other case study we just talked about, you're seeing companies that decided in the past to freeze their plan, going back in a different direction and thawing them out and reopening the plans with it. Because you can do it in a way where you've got predictable cost, you can leverage surplus assets and deliver a better solution for the employees without an incremental increase in cost. It's kind of a win-win situation with it.
And the way we think about this, and I think you all would agree, that there's no one solution for anybody. This is basically our toolbox, and you take and mix and match the tools from the box for your unique situation, for your unique population. But I think what has kind of happened over the last 15, 20 years is everybody's focused on 401k, 401k, 401k. Oh, pensions are bad. And, HSAs, people think of HSAs as health spending accounts. They're really not. The key word in the HSA is health savings account. It's really an investment and savings account. But tying all these things together to create a program that can help the newly hired, fresh out of high school or college kid to the senior executive who's been with you a long time, covering all of them and providing a benefit that kind of hits each way in those 5 generations I talked about. There's something in here for all of them. Not everything fits everyone, but if you think about your benefits as a continuum rather than a single bucket, and even take into account your health benefits, because the impact here, people don't realize it, but the cost of healthcare for people who are not retired, not because they want to keep working, but because they can't afford to retire, dramatically higher pharmaceutical costs, dramatically higher risk for workman's comp. They're the biggest users of the health plan. And this is not to be discriminatory against older people. It's just a fact. So the more we can do to get people in a position to retire when they want to, gives you the opportunity to be very selective who you keep. If everybody can retire, the only people who stay are the ones who want to be there, and they're usually your most productive people.
That's a great point. Something we say all the time is, should you be concerned about whether or not your employees can afford to retire? And I think the answer is yes, because if they can't afford to retire, they're not going to do it voluntarily. And that has
Right.
all of the implications that Kevin was just talking about.
Mhm.
So with that, I think we'll open it up to questions and see if we can help you figure out what's best for you. And I think, Kristen, do we have to turn this on for questions?
Kevin, why don't you read them?
Okay, so we have a couple that came in on the Q&A. We talked about lifetime income within retirement plans and annuitization of retirement plans. So can you tell us what are the options that are available today and what are plan sponsors doing?
Sure. If you take a look at the options that are available today, and I'm going to look at it through the lens of a defined contribution plan to start with. Depending on the design, you can take periodic payments out of the plan, or you can use the funds that are there to buy some kind of an in-plan annuity with it. There's a lot of variations on that theme, but they all tend to cluster around one of those two. And you've seen a lot of conversations, a lot of talk, a lot of focus on the in-plan annuity side with it. If you look at it on the cash balance plan side, since it's technically a defined benefit plan, that's what they were created for, to provide lifetime income with it.
And all cash balance plans have an annuity option at the end, correct?
That's absolutely right. And if you take a look at the value of one versus the other, the value of being able to do it through the cash balance plan is probably 20 to 30% greater than what it is if you're trying to do it through the defined contribution plan. Why is that? A couple of things. One is, if you're doing it in the cash balance plan, you're really buying the benefit at wholesale prices. You're not buying a retail annuity. It doesn't have expense loads. It doesn't have underwriting costs. It doesn't have profit margins. By the way, it also isn't underwritten on a gender-based mortality table. There's the actuary again. That's can be pretty significant for a woman. You're probably getting about 30% more if you're able to do it through the cash balance plan, maybe 20% for a man, because of the fact you're using unisex mortality, not gender-based mortality with it.
And there are, in the hopper as we speak, there are a number of different and interesting options being developed as well for lifetime income inside retirement plans, inside 401k. Nuveen and TIAA-CREF are rolling something out this year. I know BlackRock's working on something. Prudential's had something for years. Most of these things have been historically annuity-based, and they end up being an individual annuity. What's interesting, so in the cash balance plan, you're buying basically a wholesale annuity, almost like a pension termination annuity that is really bought on a large-scale approach. But some of the new things that are being developed are not going to be annuity based. They're going to look, smell, feel like an annuity, but they're not going to have that same guarantee and the same insurance company backing that the annuities have. But there's a lot happening in the income space. We got another question about how much work it is to implement a cash balance. And all of or at least any who touch your own 401k, the toothache of dealing with payroll every pay period and the 401k and the headaches that come along with that. Can you talk a little bit about the operations of setting up and funding a cash balance?
Sure. Lisa, would you like to answer that?
Sure. I can speak to the small business owner. So we work in our section, my particular section, with plans that have up to 50 participants, and we can design a plan and get it put in place, I would say as soon as 30 days, or certainly take as long as I guess it takes to set one up. Sometimes if there's multiple owners, we know there's multiple opinions. So we will consult with you down the entire path, no matter how long it does take. Once it gets set up and, the actuaries write the plan document, it's quite simple in terms of administration. The funding of these plans are, certainly you can do it during the year, but generally a lot of organizations fund it at once. So there's not a lot of payroll, no deferrals. There are no enrollment meetings for your staff. So it's actually a lot easier, I would say, than a 401k.
And
Anything
if you
else?
look, and if you look at things with mid-size or larger employers, it's not significantly more complicated. We're not talking about 6 months to do something. You're talking about a month or two to be able to have thoughtful conversations on what the design should look like, then get all of the documentation, plan documents, investment strategy and such in place. It's very, very straightforward.
One other question, given that, or actually two other questions, given the size of imbalances in cash balance plan, what's the typical lifespan? Is this a forever thing, like the 401k that goes on forever? Or is there an absolute max for contributions or an absolute kind of time horizon for the plan?
Well, let me answer that, and Lisa can jump in too.
Yeah.
There's something in the law called a permanency requirement, which says when you set up any kind of retirement plan, it has to be with the intent of it being permanent. Obviously, nothing's permanent and there's exceptions to all the rules, but you typically view something as permanent in the 8 to 10-year range. If you're taking a look at the business owner side, professional services side, you'll typically see the plans running for 8 years, 10 years max, and the plan will be terminated, money will be distributed, people will roll it into their IRA, rinse and repeat, set up a new plan, so it keeps on going. It's kind of the gift that keeps giving with it.
Mm.
If you look at things on the larger employer side, those do tend to be something that the expectation is they're going to run indefinitely, barring any unforeseen financial circumstances with the business.
Now, conversely,
Yeah, you hope it's forever.
yeah, from the sole proprietor up, to just a lot of the small businesses, probably with those that have less than 20 participants, it's very different. I would just say that it's probably quite opposite. You have those small businesses are treated just so much differently than the larger businesses.
Now, if you shut down a plan, because I have seen this happen where a medical practice or a law firm had a plan, shut it down. Is there a waiting period before you could reopen a plan, or how would that work?
No, there isn't, but so minimum requirement, like 3 to 5 years. So it's a bit different for a small business. So sometimes that's actually a strategy with funds from somewhere that they want to use it for 3 to 5 years. So that's the guardrail that's put in place, and that's kind of strict unless there is a virtual, some business reason the owner died or what have you. So, but that's, in terms of the small businesses, it just works a little differently.
Now, the cash balance is a hybrid plan, so it kind of feels like a defined contribution plan. But are the rules around accessing money very different, or is there loans? Is there hardships? How can a participant access money?
That's a great question. You would not have a loan feature in there.
Yeah.
Money comes out of the plan one of two ways. You retire or separate from service, or you reach age 59 and a half. So if you think of things, we'll go back to the small business owner example just to illustrate it. You could, if the person is 60 years old, you could literally have money going in one pocket and coming out the other pocket. The money gets contributed in, you get an in-service distribution that gets rolled over into an IRA. So it keeps the tax deferred nature of it.
But the in-service distribution is only available over 59 and a half, correct?
That's correct.
Right.
So theoretically, someone could make the contribution on Monday, distribute to a Roth IRA on Tuesday, if they wanted to, if they were motivated to put money into Roth.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know why you would, but
yeah,
theoretically.
Roth, that would be after tax, but yeah.
Yeah.
Well, if they had a Roth feature in a 401k, could they distribute to the 401k?
That's a really good question. I'm not sure I know the answer to that one off the top.
Neither
of
am
my
I.
head.
I just thought of it. I was like,
Yeah.
and I'm not sure because you're taking a tax deduction for the contribution.
Right,
So you would have to pay taxes on any Roth transfer.
right.
Uh,
So, yeah.
So it's probably not the most tax efficient thing. Theoretically, I think you could probably do it. I don't know why you would.
Yeah, I think you'd want to keep the tax deferred nature of it if you could.
All right, we're just about at time. If there's any other questions, please shoot them out to us or type them in for us. If you think of something later, you can obviously reach out to myself, Phil, or Lisa. We'd be happy to help you with any question you have. And we really, really appreciate everyone joining us this afternoon. And give a virtual round of applause for Phil and Lisa. They did a great job. And you know, I've been working with October 3 for a number of years now on cash balance plans, on traditional pension plans, and they have been a terrific partner for us. So please feel free to reach out to them.
Thanks, Kevin.
Thanks everyone for your time.